Good evening. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm Eve Vogelstein, president of Great Talk, and I want to thank you for joining us for live and for our virtual conversation, for sharing ideas with the very best minds. Great Talk was created 7 years ago by our co-founder, Claudine Davison, and our vice president, Diane Davison. I joined as president along with an outstanding board with numbers of Maryland institutions as our venues and partners, along with lots of Great Talk friends. The goodwill of so many enables all of us to enjoy these thought-provoking and educational programs. Tonight, I'd like to thank the Great Talk Gold sponsors, the Zaf McKinney Group at Morgan Stanley, LifeBridge Health, their financial support, and a big thank you to the Alexander Grass Humanities Institute at Johns Hopkins University for being our longtime close VIP partner. Thank you to our silver sponsor, board member Anuja Sunoka of Steer, our media co-sponsors, the Baltimore Fishbowl, the J. Moore Magazine, and the Baltimore Sun for their support. We are also very appreciative of the donations made by many of you generous supporters. Last but not least, we are deeply grateful to William Eggington, director of the Alexander Grass Humanities Institute and board member, along with Shira Dingle, his senior coordinator, for their support and graciously offering Johns Hopkins University to be the wonderful venue for this evening's community event. Great Talk is an all-volunteer nonprofit organization which depends on your tax-deductible donations to continue to make these programs available for free, like tonight's special program. Donations are always accepted. A recording of this event will be posted on YouTube, and updates of our future Great Talk events can be found on our website, greattalk.org. Well, tonight's topic is really about our future. It has been in the news a lot, but this impressive group will discuss the real issues of AI. It is now my pleasure to introduce the director of the Alexander Grass Humanities Institute, William Eggington, who will introduce tonight's panel. Thank you and enjoy our talk.
Good evening. All right. Next, we have Kathleen Featheringham, and she's a director in Booz Allen's artificial intelligence practice and leads the firm's overall AI strategy, as well as its work focused on ethical AI. An expert in strategy and change management, as well as AI and analytics, Kathleen has had more than 20 years of experience working with clients across the federal government. Let's see, on my side over here, Peter Levin is the co-founder and CEO of Amida Technology Solutions, an information technology firm that focuses on data interoperability, exchange, governance, and security. He was senior advisor to the Secretary and Chief Technology Officer at the Department of Veteran Affairs in the Obama administration and led the implementation of the VA's first social media outreach, their employee innovation and industry competitions, and their inaugural Presidential Innovations Fellows Initiative. And Mark Rotenberg is president and founder of the Center for AI and Digital Policy. He is a leading expert in data protection, open government, and AI policy. Mark is the author of several textbooks, including the 2020 AI Policy Source Book and Privacy and Society, and he helped draft the Universal Guidelines for AI, widely endorsed human rights framework for the regulation of artificial intelligence. And last but not least, a prize-winning columnist and associate editor for the Washington Post, David Ignatius writes a twice a week foreign affairs column for the Post. He's a former adjunct lecturer at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University and is currently senior fellow in the Future of Diplomacy program. He has won the George Polk Award, the Urbino International Press Award, a Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Committee for Foreign Journalists, the Légion d'honneur awarded by the French government, and as the Post's foreign editor, he supervised the paper's Pulitzer Prize-winning coverage of the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. So without further ado, I'm going to now turn the floor over to David to begin our discussion of the question, is artificial intelligence out of control and is it in our best future? Thank you very much.
So thanks to Bill and to Eve. Hello, everybody. We're going to talk tonight about what I would say is the hottest topic in the world right now. I just pulled a few headlines from the papers over the last couple of weeks. Why chatbots act so weird. Why are we so afraid of AI? How to reduce the risks from AI's original sin. And last weekend in the Wall Street Journal by the formidable trio of Henry Kissinger, Eric Schmidt, and Daniel Huttenlocher, ChatGPT heralds an intellectual revolution. So we are incredibly privileged to have four really brilliant pioneers in this field on stage tonight. I'm humbled to be the moderator of this group, but hope I'm in the same position as everybody in the audience, here to learn and understand. And I want to begin the discussion by asking each panelist in turn to explain a little bit his or her history with AI, how you got involved in this subject, how it shaped your career and you shaped the field, and then how you think about the question that we're trying to think about tonight. As AI becomes more dominant in our world, do you worry that it's out of control? How do you think about how we as human beings will interact with this extraordinary machine intelligence? So Kathleen, let me ask you to start, and then we'll go around the circle and then come back for more discussion.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Okay. Hi, so I'm Kathleen Featheringham. I have a little bit of a non-traditional background, probably considering some of the more academic backgrounds here, where I've spent good portions of my career in working in big tech, as well as heavy into strategy, policy, those types, and across a wide variety of clients. So I've actually gotten exposure. Obviously, I can't tell you all about them, different ones, but I've gotten a lot of exposure across whether it's the federal government or other parts of big industry and seeing how it is. So a lot of my perspective comes more from the actually living it day to day and how it's being incorporated and what it's doing it, including even having big contractual provisions put into our contracts that we've won associated with, let's say, AI, and what those look like, and trying to figure out brand new spaces where there isn't happened to be, let's say, a set of rules or guidelines. So some of the other areas that I've worked on is for Booz Allen, as well as developing our own ethical AI and risk framework. How are we going to decide how we were going to actually manage what we do, what it is? A couple like key things, because to get back to the heart of the questions that you're asking, out of control, I think that all depends. It depends on where and in what capacity. But is it our future? 100%. I definitely believe it is. But how and what it looks like is really up to us. And we should really take a very proactive role in what that looks like. A lot of my time has been spent in the last couple of years is on actually demystifying what AI is and isn't, and what it is and isn't now, because it is always evolving and things are changing. So there's a lot of hype out there. There's a lot of information of what it is. And every time something like ChatGPT or another thing comes up, you get the paranoia with it as well, because a lot of it's the miseducation and understanding of it. One of my favorite things to do is to honestly Google robots taking over at different times. And I've done this for the last probably 5 years. And you can see the highs and lows and what articles like news clippings come back first. There'll be stretches where it's like AI is going to cure cancer. Then there'll be the next ones where you can literally see pictures of Terminator from the movie and see that it's going to be like killing everyone. So there's a lot of variations and there's a lot of misunderstanding. There's not a lot of guidance yet. But with this being not just a US based thing, this is global. So there's other countries and what they have and what they do and what things they actually look for and do. That's also driving it. So it's not just us alone, and we can't just say, hey, we can't regulate that we are never going to have it, because that could literally put us at a disadvantage globally. So thinking about those things, it's not necessarily if it's going to happen or should it happen. It is, it's coming and it's here. And you probably use more AI than you realize right now. So every time you do stuff on your phone, every time you something pops up, like this morning I had one, or yesterday I had one where it created me a collage of which I was loved. It showed my two children from the time they were like 2 to now, and it very awe-inspiring. So the big thing, and I guess the thing I would close with, is a lot of these things are about human emotions. Machines don't have those. They're not the same. How they learn, what they are, what things happen, they're not the same, and they're programmed, but they're programmed by humans. So it's incumbent upon all of us to actually understand better how they work, what do they do, and what can they do, and what should be the humans' interactions and roles with it.
I want to follow up just one thing that you said. Imagine that you're giving a talk to one of your clients, and it's time to explain what AI is and what it isn't. What's the brief version of that? I'm sure you have to do that probably a dozen times a week.
Sure. I mean, the simple version, it's math. It really is. It's mathematical equations that are put together as sets of commands to do certain things. So that is a very, very small, vague type of answer, but it compounds and expands. So it's really about, and the first question I always ask because we get a lot of questions and a lot of times where people come to us and they're like, I want to do AI. So our very first question is, to do what? That should be the most important question. To do what and why are you doing it? Because AI may not actually be the answer. It may be completely unnecessary, or it may not be there yet. If you're using it to very, critical decisions that have life dependencies on it, you probably should have it expanded a little bit and make sure that the technology and the people who would be running that technology have the necessary requirements for it.
Mark, let me ask you to do the same thing. Give us your autobiography, if you will, your journey with, and if you could also just help us begin to think about the fundamental question of whether AI will end up threatening us. And since you're focused on rules for AI, maybe begin helping us think about rules that will make this less dangerous.
Thank you, David, and thank you to the sponsors for the opportunity to be with you this evening. I'm going to begin with a personal story about my early days with AI before I set off on my life's mission to address the lawyer shortage crisis in Washington, D.C., which I have made my life's work. But before my calling, I was actually an undergraduate, not even majoring in computer science, but fascinated by computer science. I learned one year that I had spent more time on the university's mainframe than any other student, which felt like a badge of honor, but it also included New Year's Eve. So maybe that's not so good. But I was very interested in games and in chess and backgammon, which I play competitively. And I began to write back in the 1970s, simple expert systems, rule-based systems, game heuristics. And I started teaching actually what I guess we called then artificial intelligence. And I understood it, I really did. And I think most of you, if I just described a decision tree and said, we're going to work our way through a decision tree and we're going to automate that process and we're going to figure out based on the choices we made, how we reached a particular outcome, you would actually already begin to understand how we write programs to play chess and backgammon. There's some fancy things we do when there are lots and lots of choices to try to maximize our search techniques, but it's actually very understandable. And this was my early experience with AI, and I thought I understood it pretty well. I mentioned the lawyer thing, right? So I went off and I did all this lawyer stuff. Along the way, I happened to be in Philadelphia in 1996 when IBM's program Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, who was then the world chess champion. So that was a milestone moment in what used to be my field. But then something really remarkable happened. In the years 2018, and by 2018, the world's strongest computers could easily defeat the world champion. There was no longer any pretense of having matches between man versus machine. So in 2018, the world reigning chess champion called Stockfish, filled with all the wisdom of chess grandmasters, tremendous processing capability, could solve endgames with 7 pieces or fewer, rated far above whatever the world chess champion's rating was, went up against a program called AlphaZero. And what was remarkable about AlphaZero is that it had no chess grandmaster wisdom in it. It simply knew the rules. And it optimized itself to play chess through about 10 million games, and then went up against the world reigning champion and trounced it. And this was the crossover point, you see, when machine learning in the chess world pulled ahead of the old style expert systems I understood. And Garry Kasparov wrote about this in Science magazine in 2018. And he said something remarkable has happened in this moment, which is that we are now looking at these games, seeing these brilliant moves, and we actually don't understand how they were derived. I mean, yes, I can see now why putting the king on b6 was brilliant. But if you ask me to find the move, or even ask the computer programmers why the computer produced the move, there would be no good answer. And I was already very interested in the problem of algorithmic transparency. I was aware of the discussions about black box decision-making. I'll come back to this later. But just from a personal perspective, what has seemed most interesting to me, and frankly, most challenging about AI, is our increasing inability to understand, to replicate, to prove the outcomes that are produced. And we haven't experienced this before. I hope we talk, by the way, about the Kissinger-Schmidt-Hunterlocker book, which I'm very critical of. I think the future they propose is really of concern. But if you can just think now and take away maybe from what I've said, the difference between those nice decision trees where we get to follow a process and see an outcome, and imagine a very sophisticated statistical system that will no doubt impress you with its results. But if you try to prove the results or replicate the results, there is no answer.
Just to ask you to take that a step further into what you now do with your center. If we're talking about machines that can know every move that a human ever made in chess or Go, and then can imagine moves that no human ever made or could conceive, the question of how you bound that intelligence, how you come up with rules for AI, rules for systems whose results the system can't explain and no human can explain. How do you begin to think about that? That's, if I understand it, your mission now with your center. Give us a sense of the sort of starting points for doing that.
Well, there are a lot of directions we can go. I mean, you can talk about, radiology, for example, and the fact that AI expert systems will produce better detection rates than will a trained radiologist. And so you ask yourself the question, if I'm seeking the best care, don't I want to go with the approach that has the highest level of reliability, even if I can't prove it? That's a very interesting issue, which maybe we'll get to. In my domain, which is the law, I was fascinated by a decision last year from the High Court of the European Union called the Court of Justice. Court of Justice looked at a system to evaluate travelers for the risk to public safety, whether, frankly, they might commit a terrorist act. And the system that was designed had pre-existing criteria. And it was on the basis of applying this criteria that the judgment was produced. A lot of people said, well, this is surveillance, this is Big Brother, this is lots and lots of things, which I think they were right about. But what was fascinating to me in the court's opinion, the court said this is okay because there is pre-existing criteria that can be evaluated. But if the system was based on self-learning, because it taught itself people from these countries or people, who purchased tickets in cash or any number of other factors contributed to a higher statistical likelihood of finding the suspected terrorist, the Court of Justice said, no, that we won't allow. So what's interesting to me is that at least in the legal field, some courts are already beginning to draw this line between the outputs we can assess and understand and the outputs, which, by the way, may be statistically more accurate, though we should be reluctant to rely on.
So, Rama, you're one of the genuine pioneers in this field. You and I were talking a bit before we got started about your journey from your boyhood in Chennai to being really one of the founding fathers, if you will, of pattern recognition, AI, facial recognition technology. I'd ask you to give this audience a bit of your AI biography, and then whatever thoughts you've got about our larger topic of AI and out of control.
Thanks, David. Can you hear me? Well, my story is a classic immigrant story, right? When I was in third grade, first time I heard that there is a country called United States of America. How? My school principal was visiting United States on a Fulbright scholarship, and they arranged a big reception for her. The whole school assembled, they put garlands to her and this, and I said, that must be an interesting place if they make such a big fuss about it, right? And then a few years later, I was in a local grocery store. All the elders were very concerned. They were talking in a hushed voice. And that's when they talked about President Kennedy's assassination. I said, okay, this country must be really something. So I wrote to the embassy in Delhi in a little 6 paise, it's like really less than a cent maybe, postcard. Dear ambassador, I want to learn about your country. Would you please send me a book? Somebody said, if you write, they'll send you a book. I forgot. 2 months later, a big envelope, a nice color book with President George Washington on the cover. So I said, wow. So I read it. So my interest was about looking, what is this country is all about? 1969, moon landing. I was like, 16 years old. So my ears glued to the radio and you hear this little sound, the peep, peep sound, conversations. So I said, if a country can send humans to moon and bring them back, I want to find out, what I should do and so forth. So I got into engineering. I studied pattern recognition in 1977 spring in Indians of Science. I was fascinated by that field. And as you know, pattern recognition is one of the components of AI. So I came to Purdue. Purdue had the best professors at that time, world-class leaders in pattern recognition. While a student at Purdue, I also came under the influence of Professor Asriel Rosenfeld, a founding father of computer vision. And I finished in 4 years, went to California, 10 years, 29 years at College Park, and I came to Hopkins in 2020. Over the years, so I'm about 42nd year in my profession. I have worked on technology, applied to face recognition, applied to medicine, applied to autonomous driving. As you can see, these are all very hot areas still. Everybody is worried about AI working very well. In the 80s, we used to say, if it worked, it's pattern recognition. If it did not work, it's AI. In the 90s, we used to say, if it worked, it's computer vision. If it did not work, it's AI. So AI, had this issue. The rule-based system that Mark talked about, there's a system called MySyn, which was done in the early 70s, 460 rules for analyzing some blood infection problem. So people wrote, they figured out if this is the case, what you should do, It was intelligent in some sense. There was interaction. It allowed interaction with the physician. It was interpretable and all of that. So some of the things we worry about, Mycin had that, but it was never deployed. And I switched over to computer vision in the late 70s and early 80s because AI was going through a winter, its first winter, right? Because a lot was expected of it and it didn't deliver. DARPA shut down the speech understanding program. A report from UK came. Lytle, a physicist, said, nah, AI is not good. So everybody dropped the funding and of course is now back big time and so on. So my interaction with the autonomous land vehicle started in the early 90s. DARPA had a program known as autonomous land vehicle in the mid 80s. The idea was to instrument a vehicle with cameras and see what it can do. Can the vehicle can go around? And Pittsburgh CMU had a lot of work in this. They had something called NAV Lab, Chuck Thorpe, as you may know. So in the early 90s, it became a bigger project, unmanned ground vehicle. And so I was involved in that. We developed algorithms for the vehicle to go on its own based on landmarks, detect pedestrians and see if there is a pothole. In fact, we will even identify terrain drops so that it doesn't just fall and get stuck. So that's something, we have been doing. And as you know, now Tesla has many of those features, right? You have this blind spot detectors and it will tell you if you are going to hit the car in front of you, et cetera, et cetera. In the case of medicine, I started looking in the early 90s how we can estimate the muscle strength by using surface measurements. I was very young and stupid. It's an impossible problem, but you try. So, but now I'm at Hopkins, we are doing lots of things with AI and medicine, at least 6 different groups, cancer group, autism group, geriatrics, and all that stuff is going on. And the face recognition, I wrote my first paper in 1992. And now it has become a big application of AI. It's working, but there are a lot of things we worry about. What do I worry about AI? Now coming back to David's question, is AI going to become, much bigger than us? Thanks to Hollywood, of course, right? iRobot and the Terminator and all of that. But the current AI is somewhat weaker, I think, than the older AI. I'll tell you why. It's so data dependent. You change data, the performance will drop. It's called domain shift. So what works in this hospital data, when you transfer it to the next hospital, next pathology lab, the performance goes down because of the data is different. It is so much in love with the data it has been given, it really cannot do much outside. So whether it will go berserk depends on what is the probability that it will go beyond what it has seen, because it's very much data dependent, the training, the loss functions, everything we use. So I like to say Apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. AI will do stupid things, but it cannot, go too far because there are bounds we don't understand yet, but it clings to the training data. Okay, so that's one issue. It's vulnerable. We can attack it. We can hack it. We have a program for DARPA called GOD. We develop methods to defend AI. Third one, of course, the ethical consideration. How do you collect data? How do you curate data? Can I go and take all your faces and design a face recognition system? Absolutely not. When we build, we only take faces of famous athletes, actors, presidents, politicians, a lot of Bollywood actors. It's okay. So we build them, right? But the data set has to be properly balanced. Otherwise, it doesn't work for a different demographic, okay? So we have all these issues and we can actually probe an AI algorithm now and measure how much bias it has to some covariates and come up with adversarial training method and so on. So I want to tell everyone, AI has more good than bad, okay? So I think that it is here to stay. No more all these swings because we have data, we have GPUs, we can continue to mine. Personalized medicine is possible. As we were talking, David, we can continue to, my doctor only remembers what we talked a few months ago. Even then they will take the notes. Oh, we talked about it last time. So how is it now? Okay. AI can keep your record right from the time you took your immunization. Keep it all the way and continue to mine, continue to record and see if there are so personalized medicine is going to be big in medicine and I'm very confident. So to cut it short, AI has more good than what it can do. And finally, it's the software. Okay, so we kind of know what to do with the software, right? I won't like to put it just in front of you and say, okay, live with it. That's what Tesla is doing. If you have the fully automated, I won't do that. That's kind of questionable, but we can monitor it, we can probe it, we can fix it.
I'm going to just ask as a follow-up, since, as I say, you're one of the founding fathers here. When we think about human consciousness, we have an idea of how we think, how we interpret the data that our senses are taking in. Can you describe the consciousness of the most advanced AI systems, or is that just a wrong, inappropriate term? Is there no machine consciousness?
A lighter version of that in computer vision we call common sense reasoning or contextual processing. You know, we will make a decision given an image, and we'll see if a tank is seen in a battlefield. Yeah, we don't care about it. But if we see it on the beltway, we say, hey, what is going on here, right? So context is very important in computer vision. And a broader version is common sense reasoning. Can by looking at a picture, can an algorithm make decisions? And we are not there yet. So humans have that. And the other thing I also notice is that when we are put in a totally different place, okay, let's say you lived all your life in DC and I put you in Chennai. Yeah, you will be somewhat little disoriented, but you're not going to go totally, you know, out of this thing, right? Because you are able to process the information, relate to what you know before, and kind of, you know, measure your presence in this. So that's the kind of human conscience is there, knowing where you are and what's going on. AI doesn't have that. AI has to be reprogrammed. For example, a Tesla that's driving well in Indiana won't do well in Mumbai. Of course, we even drive the other way, as you know, right? So because of those situations. So even computer vision people, we have worked on it. We still are not sure how to put common sense reasoning in a general situation. So AI doesn't know what it is doing to some extent. The old AI know a little bit. Rule-based systems, decision trees, it kind of will explain because it's modeling, Bayesian networks. They all can explain. Purely data-driven method, it's just beginning. There's something known as class activation map, grad class activation map. If a neural networks make a decision, we can probe and see, like Ross Perot used to say, look under the hood. We can go inside and see which layer is lighting up, which neurons are lighting up, why it is, little bit. But conscience is too far away, so it's not there.
I'd ask for the same AI biography. And we were talking earlier about data being the essential food of these systems. That's an area that you specialized in. So maybe you could speak to that.
Thank you, David. And thank you also for the wonderful invitation to be here tonight. I would say I respectfully disagree, but deeply disagree with what Mark said with regards to the algorithms. Strongly do agree with what Rama said about the data. Oh, I'm sorry. How closer to the mouth? Okay, good. So the algorithms are not the problem. When I hear in the popular press that we can't figure out how they made their decision, I interpret that the way that maybe some of you feel when you hear famous celebrities talking about the flat Earth, right? Yeah, you're allowed your opinion, and we do have a lot of scientific fact that the Earth is more oval-shaped than square-shaped. We absolutely positively know how these algorithms work. They're stochastic, they're statistical. Sometimes they're going to make a left, sometimes they're going to make a right. Sometimes they're going to choose green, sometimes they're going to choose red. But we always know why. We always know why. It's the data that is the problem. It is the data that we're using in some of these decision tools and decision trees that is skewed, that's biased, that it has patterns in it that we have accumulated over, in some cases, hundreds of years. I'm working with a data set now, the first sample of which was taken in 1861, right? It's a tissue sample, right? So all these data inputs, the raw fuel, the ingestion mechanisms into our AI algorithms are fundamentally what is concerning to us as citizens and people, voters and participants in our market economy. The rule-based systems, there are some things that computers will never see. Thinking of the incompleteness theorem, of course, right? So it ends up, and this gets very arcane very quickly, but it ends up that we know from a sector of mathematics called propositional logic, already kind of horrible and dry, that there are things that you will never be able to see from a rule-based system. So you always have to make a choice. Do you want everything to be consistent, or do you want everything to be complete? Do you want to know everything that's possible, or do you want to know the decisions that you're making are consistent with each other, and you have to make a choice? That's the thing called the incompleteness theorem. What this means in real life is that for some reason that we still don't know, for some reason that we still can't derive, there are things that people come up with that computers do not come up with. Now you can say, well, what about ChatGPT, and what about the protein folding problem, and what about the chess games? They are following rules, and they're following rules of physics, they're following rules of chemistry, they're following rules of games, and they can follow those rules faster than any human being possibly can. And they will discover chess moves, they will discover medicines, they will create text that no human being could ever write or will ever write. But it is just a reflection. It's just what we taught it to do. There's algorithms that decide whether a molecule is bending a certain way. There's algorithms that decide whether you want to move the queen now or not. There's algorithms that decide what is the next letter in the word that I want to print. And how often have I seen that before? Because language has natural structure to it. The problem is that you can contaminate the data stream. And again, Rama would know this much, much better than I do. But I can show you a picture, and it'll be a picture of somebody you know or recognize, perhaps a family member, perhaps a celebrity, perhaps a politician. You say, I know who that person is. But when I put that picture into a vision algorithm, because of the math behind the way that the computer analyzes, computers do not see. Computers do not think, computers analyze. They're performing mathematical algorithms. And those transforms, those things that we do to convert spatial distributions into frequency distributions, can trick the algorithms into thinking that there's a weapon where there is no weapon, or concealing armaments that are actually there. Those things exist today. This is called adversarial AI. But it's not adversarial AI at all. It's adversarial data. We need to be very, very clear about that. The Kissinger-Schmidt-Huttenlocher book is brilliant. I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend it. It is wrong from the word go. It's actually very hard to publish a book review that claims that Henry Kissinger, Eric Schmidt, Sam Harris, Peter Attia, Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, all the people who you know and recognize are predicting that the Borgs are going to be taking over, and we need protections now. If you say that they're wrong and you don't have a Nobel Prize or you're not an IEEE fellow, it's hard to get that review published, but you can. And I hope we'll get a chance to talk about where they have made their fundamental mistakes. But there are, as I say, there are branches of mathematics, there are branches of computer science, there are precedents in the way that we look at these kinds of algorithms where we can claim dispositively that they are mistaken in their heightened fear, but we still have to take very good care of the data because the data can mess us up.
Well, I want to come right back and ask you to talk about why Kissinger and his junior authors are wrong from the start. Let me just preface that by saying that last October, for a forum at the Washington National Cathedral that I helped organize with my siblings for my parents, now my father, our subject was AI. And our panelists started with Henry Kissinger, who can't come to Washington, but I went up to New York and interviewed him. Eric Schmidt, woman named Ann Neuberger, who used to work for National Security Agency, now works in the White House. And my own feeling as a non-technician is that Kissinger has seen something very powerful, which is that AI systems that can think of every move a human ever made and every move that a human ever imagined, when applied to warfare, will have potentially a diabolical effect. So when you say he's wrong from the start, I want you to explain that.
So what I mean with great respect, I mean, I do recommend the book, but I do believe the book is fundamentally wrong, is that in the very specific context, and I'm going to nominate a couple of others in a second, in a very specific context, whether we're talking about a chess field or a battlefield, you actually have tremendous benefit. You have national security implications if you can take the military assets, whether they're physical assets or human assets or intelligence, and play war games and make moves that you have never been seen before. So in that sense, it's incredibly interesting. It's incredibly fun. I play against AI-driven chess games every day. Let me give you a counter example. RAMA works on applications of medicine. I'm assuming, especially given your background, that you're looking at certain kinds of lesions. And those lesions very often have a ruler next to them, right? So that when we're taking the picture, because of course in 2 dimensions, we have no sense of scale. And so sometimes the doctors or the pathologists will put a ruler next to it. And so some of the algorithms will only recognize a lesion if there's a ruler in the picture, having nothing to do with the lesion itself. That's one example, right? Another example might be the Tesla self-driving machines. Oh, I'm sorry, I keep going down. Another example might be the Tesla self-driving machines, where I think there was even a death where there was a jaywalker and the car did not recognize the jaywalker because the jaywalker was walking outside of the crosswalk on the street. That was the root cause of the problem. Now, do you think that car is murderous? Do you think that car made a moral decision? Well, it's that guy's problem. If he's not in the crosswalk, he gets to die? Of course not. Of course not. It was a problem of the data. It was a problem of the programming. So did I answer your question?
That's the beginning of an answer. I think we have a lively conversation about this. Rama, and then I think Mark, you also want,
Well, I think one of the things we are doing now is since, privacy concern was mentioned. And I also said that since it very much depends on the data you have given, it will have problems when it sees different data on the same problem, but different data from different lab, different instrument, et cetera, et cetera. So we are looking at whether synthetic data, imagined data, will it make AI more robust? We actually have a project with APL and working for Army Research Lab. Let's say somebody is doing something from a ground view, and I want to be able to recognize it from a UAV, or from a UAV view, I want to recognize from a ground view. There is distortion, geometric distortion. What looks from ground may not be same as to what looks from the top. And we may not have enough data. Right? UAV collected data is a different style, ground-based data is a different style. So we synthesize a human. We synthesize humans doing things from every which way. And by augmenting that, we are able to improve performance. So I like to say, sensors can only capture what has happened. Imagination can say, what if? So that is where the thing we are talking about, what if, since I can simulate all kinds of things and I can use the data in making my algorithm robust, but it is still limited within the data domain, right? So that's one thing we have to remember.
I want to turn to each panelist. I just have to say that's really a takeaway for me. Since sensors can only capture what happened, imagination can focus on what if. Kathleen, and then Mark, I think you also had some thoughts about this question. So I hope about the question of transparency of algorithms.
Yeah, so I think I want to take it from the more kind of practical nature of it, because given that I deal with every day of people who are trying to use things now or want to use. Okay, I think that the largest thing I would recommend people thinking about is we often humanize machines. Humans and machines are not the same things. So we put on attributes of thinking, consciousness, those things. These are, again, coded sets of instructions to do things. I know that seems very simplified and it gets very, very complex. Humans by nature are good at a very particular thing. They're good at critical thinking. You have in your head one of the best, most powerful supercomputers that there is. So there's things that you're doing and deriving patterns or things that when you just are like, I just have a feeling. You're doing and processing and doing all that in your head. Machines have to be taught. And you've heard about it and you've probably seen all the funny memes of like, there's pictures where a machine couldn't tell the difference between a corgi butt and a slice of toast. You know, these are things that it's being trained. My least favorite wording of using is learning, because learning is a very human thing to do. And so humans tend to learn by factual based things. Like I learned the capital of the United States is, Washington, D.C., or experience. I learned and experienced things by riding a bike. That's not how machines, quote unquote, learn. They'll go through, it could be things, and there's a lot of value to those. And it's not that you have to necessarily know things, because a lot of the times it can assist you. For example, what if it can actually give you questions that you didn't even know to ask the question to get the answer? So, what about, could this drug be used for a different type of cancer? What if I didn't even know to ask that question? How do you get leads? How do you do that? Machines are inherently good at computational things, rote tasks, those types of things that you're there, so you use them. So it is very contextual based. So I fall somewhere in between, I think all of them here. It's dependent upon the usages of it, the parameters of it. So the big thing that scares everybody is unsupervised learning. That means that the machine can go off and just change the things of what it wants to do. So if you put that in more simple terms, humans, when they create models, tend to go with logic-based models. I want to understand all the aspects of the problem, and then I will create a model that does that and gets me to that because I understand fundamentally. There's different parts of AI that allow you to not have to know all the different parts of the problems. There's a lot of things that are highly complex. I wholeheartedly agree. It very much is about the data and the usage of data. Data by itself is not inherently bad. Data sets, very old historic data sets, they have a purpose. They have a purpose for different things in different models. If you're using it to represent the global population today, probably not as accurate. But if you were looking at it to represent something previously or to give you some insights, absolutely. The other big thing about it is algorithms get better as they're put into real use. You can only generate or synthetically or those things so many different scenarios. So the understanding of having to put it in with safeguards. So I talked about those parameters. Algorithms tend to have parameters that they are starting with. And if it's like a supervised learning, those parameters are fixed. When it goes into the unsupervised and stuff, then there's value to those. It means the parameters can shift. So if you somewhere fall in between these gentlemen in terms of things, especially about explainability. Yes, there are certain things that are black box that still, they can't necessarily give you the finite things of how logically I went from here to here to here, but there are other things that are being developed that actually you can give, hey, what were the parameters? How did they shift? What was the basis of information that shifted those parameters? They are much harder to actually develop, but that whole field of study, you'll hear some of it of like explainable AI, transparent AI. There's a lot of it there, and it is for the right purposes. But a lot of these things is how they're used and when. And you can also put in things into what we call into operations, actually like physical use. You can put it with some safeguards. So let's say you're putting it next to a human operator who's doing something. You could actually capture if the human overrides, if it overrides. And why? Why did it override? Because it actually needs more data. And that in itself is data. Like if a human is doing something, that's another set of data that helps improve algorithms. And so it's a lot about what are our human thresholds. So for example, we talked about cars. Humans tend to inherently go to algorithms should be 99% accurate. I mean, I drove from Northern Virginia today. I don't know, I didn't see a single human that was 99% accurate in their driving. But so we put a lot more higher emphasis on what is accuracy of humans than we do for machines.
That's a rich discussion. Mark, your thoughts?
So much to say, so little time. I wish I had a automated text generator to help me with the question you've asked. First, I'm sorry, what's your name? Peter. So I agree and I disagree with what you said, both opinions landing on one person. The data is a real problem, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but also the inability to prove the outcome of algorithms is a real problem and widely understood. And by the way, if we're talking about AlphaZero in the chess context, or AlphaGo, which beat Lee Sedol in 2017, there was no data at the outset. Yes, but this is the key point. The challenges that reinforcement learning systems raise are necessarily black box problems even before you get to the data. Your example regarding the lesion in the images wasn't quite stated correctly. That's from Brian Christensen's The Alignment Problem. And what he is describing is the inference that the ruler contributes to the malignant diagnosis, because we see lesions in medical journals being studied in the context of malignancy. Okay, thank you. I could go on. But let me say, just close. That was Gödel's theorem, by the way, the incompleteness theorem, but it's not an excuse for bad or unaccountable programming. Now, regarding the Kissinger-Schmidt-Hunterlocher book, I did publish an extensive review of the book. It's in Issues in Science and Technology, and I encourage people to look at it. David, I don't know what year you interviewed Kissinger, but what struck me most interesting about his views on AI is how they changed. You see, because in 2018, Henry Kissinger wrote this remarkable essay in The Atlantic, warning about the end of the age of enlightenment. And he was ringing alarm bells. He said, these systems are going to challenge how we think of human reason, how we think of learning. And he urged the creation of a national commission, along with his discussion of warfare techniques, to address these challenges. I thought it was a very thoughtful, very timely, very important essay. And I was particularly struck, by the way, that Kissinger, the foreign policy expert in 2018, was writing about AI, not in terms of the competition with China, which we haven't talked about, but is a very big issue, but rather what it meant for the future of human reason and humanity. And then I picked up the book 2 years later, co-authored with Schmidt and Hunterlocher, and I found none of that in the book. The book is a raw step aside, let AI rule us, because it will make better decisions than we can. And that was reflected also in the Washington Post commentary in the past week, which basically distilled what is contained in the book. I really urge people a close and careful read of that book. Actually, the true story, by the way, because people know my views of that book, I actually proposed to someone this past week that we organize what's called a bug bounty. You guys know what a bug bounty is. And we would give awards to people who found errors and sentences in that book. We would post them, right? It wasn't a computational problem. It was a human reasoning problem that appears in page after page of that book. And just among the critiques I made, I said, what really concerned me is that whenever they confronted a hard problem, they said, don't worry about this. This is the way the future will be. And I thought, well, that's a clever way to make an argument. I'm familiar with debating both sides and trying to figure out who has the better of the argument. But apparently this trio has come up with a new technique which is just to tell us what the future would be so we can all get some rest. That's my view of that.
I think more and more we are seeing, will AI get better of us and so forth. I like human and AI, not human versus AI. I'll give you one example. Face recognition system we built for the US government for an IARPA project. The natural question was, there are forensic examiners who are doing it every day. Can you tell us whether your system is better? There is a black box test, Our systems will be given the same images, faces to match, the forensic examiner, super recognizers. These are people who can recognize faces. They don't know why they do so well, super recognizers. Fingerprint matchers in FBI trained to do face recognition, and then students. So we gave them 4 algorithms, 1 from Oxford, 3 from my group. The Oxford algorithm performed like what the student did. One of our algorithms performed like forensic examiners. We are not saying our algorithm is behaving like a human. We are just saying it's performing at the level of the human. So that is basically what can happen with deep learning. With so much data, if you ask me, give 1,000 images, who they are, and then you ask the AI algorithm, it probably will do better, but it doesn't mean it knows what it's doing. But on the other hand, when we took the best of our algorithm and the human forensic examiner, the performance shot up. So I'm thinking more and more in medicine. Domain is very important in medicine. White coats are important. We can't go to a hospital with just deep learning system sitting there. Hey, what do you want? Although, by the way, Star Wars, all the doctors were robots, if you remember, okay? That ain't happening, that's movie. So now you have to go, and then there is a doctor, there is a patient, and there is a little box next to him, and he says it is AI. So the patient, of course, I trust my doctor. He went to Harvard, Hopkins, other places. So he says, Rama, this is your report. I recommend this. Maybe 10 years from now, you'll say, Rama, my AI is saying that you need to look at it. I said, hey, doc, I know you went to good school. I'm not sure because there is a data problem, there is the ethics problem, all of that. So at what point a doctor was comfortable putting a sign in his room, AI is helping me? Think about it, right? When you go to a place where there's a video camera, you will see, hey, you are being recorded, be warned. So at what point the doctor will do that? But you know what? It will be helpful if the AI is sitting next to the doctor because it can mine data forever and keep track of everything, say sodium went down, this went up, that went up, what's going on, create triggers. A human can, just like in chess, the Kasparov could look up 7, 8 moves. A computer can look at 30 moves ahead, right? So, likewise in health. So let's not worry about human versus AI, human and AI. That's what I'm interested, human, robot. One more example. Let's assume some of you buy the fully automated Tesla car, so-called, let's call it AI car. I like the safety features, but I want to drive. I don't know what the software is going to do because I have written software that does strange things sometimes. So I don't completely buy it. On the freeway, 65 miles an hour, half the cars are AI cars, half are human cars. That's one hell of a human AI interaction problem I would like to look at because we are all driving at 70 miles an hour. AI cars may know the rules, but it may behave differently. Whereas when I see a pedestrian, it doesn't matter whether the pedestrian is on the walk thing or outside. I don't want to hit the pedestrian. So how is this all going to work out is going to be very interesting. I think I talked too much. Thank you.
So I want to turn to Kathleen, who had a comment, but I just want to briefly seize, it's rare that a journalist has an opportunity to speak on behalf of Henry Kissinger. Thank goodness. But having read the article that Mark mentioned, AI and the End of the Age of Enlightenment, which I thought was brilliant. And then having talked with Kissinger about his own personal intellectual journey to try to understand this, he's 99 years old. He can barely get out of a chair, but he still has this intensely curious and active mind. And as he describes it, he was at a conference and there was a discussion of AI, and he thought this is a great time to get some rest. And it was Eric Schmidt on stage and explaining things that he found so interesting and provocative that he asked Schmidt to be his tutor. And he spent 4 years reading, thinking, going on a journey with Eric. I can't speak to the errors in the book, but I would urge you, if you haven't seen it, and also urge the audience to take a look at something that was published by those same three, Kissinger, Schmidt, and Hunderlacher, in the Wall Street Journal last weekend. And it could not be farther from the assertion, don't worry, AI will take care of it. It is almost dystopian in its tone. So I just note, I think Kissinger on this question has looked into the abyss and is concerned.
That's because they read my review.
So that's a great answer. That's the answer that Kissinger would give. So let me turn to Kathleen and then Peter.
Just a couple quick things I wanted to add on for Rama's thing theory said is, I think this is all thinking about it as an evolution. And I really do like thinking about it as it's how it's assisting humans. And these are all risk choices. You're balancing the good and the risk and the bad of the things too, but can it help you? So I'll expand upon the doctor analogy. So I had great fortune to talk to, some leading doctors and things associated with it, some common problems in medicine. So you have, let's take a doctor who was trained, let's say in New York, and they learned classically and they learned certain things, but then they're now actually acting as a doctor, but let's say in New Orleans, where there is different cultures, different backgrounds, different things. Patients will come in of different backgrounds, and they may use colloquialisms to name a certain type of ailment. And if that doctor is not familiar with it, they may completely misdiagnose because they didn't have that set of information. Had they known that that meant this, they could have. But if you have things about that, let's say you have some AI systems, when they go to, let's say they type in the notes, they type in the colloquial name of whatever it is, you could have some things that pop up and says, you might want to look for this. You might want to ask them about this because this could be a regional type of thing that would do this. It's not that that doctor is any less smart, but how in the world could you train a doctor to be literally educated on all the colloquialisms that are ever out there in place?
So relate to that. My daughter, when she was 18 months, we went to India. She came back. She had fever, very bad stomachache, admitted in Adventist hospital and so on. Doctors didn't know what was happening. And then I told my another Indian doctor friend, he said, didn't you go to India? And I said, ask them to test for typhoid. And bad enough, she had typhoid, right? And so we had to rush her to Georgetown. The chief of infectious disease knew what exactly, but her pediatrician had no clue. They're reading books. So if we had given these symptoms to an AI thing, it would say, oh, you went to India, you have stomachache and you have fever, this and that. Yeah, maybe you should check, but it will surely, it can do that. So that's what I'm saying. AI can mine this data and provide, suggestions. Still, the doctor can look at it and so on.
Peter.
So I think we should start a book club because I'm about to nominate another one. There's a recent book, relatively recent book by Robert Greene. I believe it's called Human Nature. It's got human nature in the title. I don't know if you've looked at that. And his point is that we are ultimately, all of us as individuals, self-interested. Now, some of us are slightly more altruistic, some of us are slightly less altruistic, but really as a species, as a sentient conscious species, we're ultimately just self-interested. And so if I were to, oh, by the way, he makes Machiavelli look like Bernie Sanders. I mean, he's really, really, really cynical. Again, brilliant book, really thoughtful, great analogies, penetrating insights. So if I had the privilege and the opportunity of engaging Secretary Kissinger in a conversation, I would say that his primary concern is that AI is going to automate and accelerate the realpolitik that he was writing about in the 80s and 90s. And the realpolitik that he was talking about then, and the brilliant book of diplomacy in China, it's really a story of our self-interest and where we make compromises and where we don't, how we make those compromises, why we do that. And so you asked earlier, what is the fundamental problem? The fundamental problem is that it is not creative. It will not see things that we as human beings can see. Now, we can't explain why we do that, and they don't yet. Mark mentioned the Gödel incompleteness theorem. I personally think that that's the root of the argument, but really, at the end of the day, we don't know. But the mistake that they make and the amplification in the media is that somehow we are going to be subordinated to robots and artificial creatures that we have made, but that will somehow subsume us. Certainly, there are going to be crises and scandals in terms of AI making decisions, life and death decisions, whether it's driving on a road or the deployment of active munition, kinetic munition. But I think that they have missed the point and missed the opportunity to discuss in a more substantial way, in a more thoughtful way, in a more honorable way, how it is that we can use these kinds of tools to improve our lives without heightening the fear that somehow they're going to disenfranchise us.
Mark.
Okay, so 3 quick points. Book recommendation. I read a lot of books on AI, but actually one of my favorite is the fictional book Clara and the Sun, which looks at the world from the view of an AI, and it's really a wonderful story. A word on the problem with data, and agreeing now with Peter. Let me give you the simple scenario where 2 young men are sentenced for the same crime. One gets a 9-month prison sentence and the other gets a 6-month prison sentence. And the only key distinguishing factor is that the first young man is African American, and the second young man is Caucasian. And if you look under the hood, by the way, and you do the statistical analysis, you will find that recidivism, the likelihood to recommit the crime, is aligned, positively correlated with race. So guess what? It's a rational sentence, and it is entirely unjust, yes? That's one of the issues that arises with machine learning when we start to think about statistical methods to generate outcomes. But I did want to take just a moment, because I think David has asked me this question now twice, to say a little bit about what we do at the center. We took as our task to assess national AI policies and practices against a metric to measure democratic values. Small d democratic values. And our theory was that there were basically 2 futures. There was one in which we managed AI in an open, pluralistic, innovative society. And there was another in which AI largely managed us in a closed, authoritarian society. And by the way, I think both scenarios are possible. Right? And, you talk to people in the realm of computer science and they say, yes, both scenarios are possible. So we have 12 metrics that help us identify the world that we want to be in. We put together this big research group with about 500 people in 60 countries, and we now publish an annual report called Artificial Intelligence and Democratic Values. And we've left for you the postcard with a QR code. I used to carry these books around to conferences, said, why do that? There's this cool thing called a QR code. So you can download it. But you'll see in our analysis, which is both narrative, because we really do try to understand what countries are doing, and quantitative, because we also try to measure this in some rough way, some very interesting emerging trends. There is a real belief today around the world that we need human-centric, trustworthy AI. Those are 2 very powerful phrases that international organizations, the OECD, the G20, UNESCO have embraced. We are working also with the European Union on the first comprehensive legal framework. We're working with the Council of Europe on the first global treaty to try to establish baseline normative standards to protect fundamental rights. But the scary part, and I'll stop here, the scary part is this very strong sense, and I think all of us have, which is that the rate of change is accelerating, right? I mean, I've been in the technology policy world for a long time, and I'm familiar with the gap between what's happening in the world and where the law is. But I would say in this moment, that gap is like, increasing exponentially. I mean, yeah, 5 months ago, some people knew about GPT, but as a general matter, it's not publicly known. The policy world hadn't considered it. No one in Congress was saying, when are we going to do that hearing on GPT-3? And now it's exploded like the issue of the year. So these challenges, I think, are very real and very immediate.
So I love your phrase, human-centric, trustworthy AI. That's a keeper. So we're almost to 8:30, and I want to leave a little time for questions from the audience before we get people home. So maybe this is a good time to ask each of our panelists for just some closing thoughts in this part of our discussion, and then people do have questions in the audience. We'll go to the audience. Peter, start us off.
I'll make two very, very brief comments. One topic that we did not cover tonight was the notion of synthetic data. I want to recognize that there's someone in the audience who's actually a leading expert in the United States on exactly that topic, consistent with my somewhat sanguine view of artificial intelligence. I would also say that synthetic data has an important role in this topic, and it's a good way of measuring the fairness, the human-centeredness, the justness of those algorithms. My very last comment will be that many of us have talked about the Turing test. David, is that something that you know, the Turing test?
Yes, but explain it to the audience.
Okay, so the Turing test in one sentence is a threshold defined by a mathematician named Alan Turing, the inventor of the Enigma machine, who said that
the Enigma machine.
I'm sorry?
I think he figured out a way to exploit it. He didn't invent it.
I thought he invented it, but you could be right. That he was a mathematician in the 30s and 40s, and he basically said that we will know we've achieved artificial intelligence when you can have a conversation with a machine that is indistinguishable from a human being. And to a certain extent, I think that we have crossed that threshold recently with ChatGPT. Allowing Alan Turing to define what our threshold is of artificial intelligence is, in my view, similar to allowing Thomas Jefferson to define our social compact. Both men made fundamental contributions, one in mathematics and AI, the other one in democracy and the expressions of liberty, but they both had fundamental flaws too. There are certain things about Thomas Jefferson's behavior that I think we would not find culturally or contextually aligned with what we would expect today. Same with AI. Right? The fact that we have come up with an incredibly clever way for a machine to write text that sounds like a person wrote it is not the same thing as sentient consciousness.
So what's a modern 2023 definition of a thinking machine if it's not a Turing test?
It's a great question. I would go so far to say that it's inapt, with respect, with great respect, David, that we are somehow expecting, I think Kathleen said, that we humanize our machines, and somehow we're humanizing the notion of consciousness. I have no ambition, expectation, or desire to have an intimate relationship with a robot. That's not going to happen. And I hear giggles, and I'm glad for that, right? There's something innately repulsive about that. And so to your question, I would say we are not going to have a machine that thinks. We're going to have a machine that recognizes patterns, that that algorithmically demonstrates that it can be helpful to us in checking our spelling or diagnosing our disease or making sure we don't wreck our car. But that's not the same thing as thinking. Thinking is something that animals and human beings do. It's not something that machines do.
Oh. Peter, we are working on the synthetic data, as I mentioned before, because it allows us to cross across domain shifts, geometry, appearance, and all of that. I think it's it's part of generative models, generative AI models. They can visualize, imagine. The thing I worry about is the disparity. Somebody not learning AI and somebody learning AI. Computer science has now become the most popular, disciplines because you can finish and go to one of the FANG companies. My student in 2019 got an offer from one of the FANG companies, 300K, and he said he's waiting for an offer from one of the other FANG companies. They said 350K today, can you sign? 27-year-old. He was making more money than me at that time. He's probably still making more money than me. So people ask me, what do you do? I say, I bring young kids to my fold, teach them stuff and get them jobs so that they can make more money than me. You know what they ask? Are you a priest? I said, sometimes it looks like, because I preach a lot. So it looks like this. So the disparity. In fact, we saw it, 2000 time onwards, along the coast. The kids are all going to schools and getting educated, high tech and computer science, this and that. Middle America is somewhat lagging behind in doing. So we need to make sure that everybody gets educated. In fact, my course AI at Hopkins is primarily for engineers, because after everything's said and done, AI is an engineered system. And AI talking to Alexa is an engineer. It's not just all software. It has to talk to cameras. It has to talk to your wearable sensors, interface issues. Engineers are good at that. So we are teaching AI to chemical engineers, to mechanical engineers, environmental engineers, civil engineers, and also computer scientists and EC. So we need to provide broad education. In fact, we now are setting up a core, a unit lesson for high school students in AI. I'll be doing that in March 23rd at a meeting of all the teachers in Atlanta. So we need to, I'm telling, PyTorch can be taught at grade 6. I know 5th graders who do programming. So we need to teach them because it's a very useful technique. You can't send people out to the workforce without at least knowing the basics of AI. It makes a big difference in terms of what kind of jobs you will get. So we need to focus. And as an educator, I think about it a lot. So AI education at all levels is very important.
Mark.
First of all, I think we all need to congratulate ourselves for getting to the very end of a panel on AI in 2023 and not yet having mentioned Kevin Roos's column for the New York Times. This for me is a first, but for those of you who don't know what I'm referring to, this was the business reporter for the New York Times who sat down with ChatGPT for 2 hours, learned that it had a dark side called Sydney, that it wanted to destroy the world and unleash viruses, and then declared its love for Kevin and sought to break up his marriage, all in the course of 2 hours. Now, the backstory, which I think is interesting, is just a couple of weeks earlier, he wrote an initial response to ChatGPT when the high schools in New York were saying they would ban it, because who needs an English teacher when you have a program that can do your writing for you, right? And he said, no, we need to be more thoughtful about this. And he was actually one of the earlier advocates for the use of ChatGPT in schools. And then he had what he described as the scariest 2 hours of his life just a couple of weeks later. So things could change very rapidly in this world. And I want to leave you, first of all, with a thought, someone who had a big effect on me, who actually wrote the first chatbot, a professor at MIT named Joseph Weizenbaum. Weizenbaum wrote a program that basically, a very simple program, people would make a statement, the program would recast it as a question, and suddenly they thought they were in a conversation. And he was concerned actually by how taken people were by a simple program. He wrote a book called Computer Power and Human Reason, which is a very important book. And if you want to get really behind the debate over ChatGPT, I recommend you add that to your AI book club list. Last point. So we've talked a lot in the AI policy world about humans in the loop, but I was really inspired by a conference that was held last year at Stanford, where they decided not to use this phrase, humans in the loop. They said instead, AI in the loop, humans in charge. And that seems about right. So I'm going to get behind that slogan and probably have a new laptop sticker for you at the next Great Talk event.
Humans. Kathleen.
I mean, so on that note, I have to believe in human ingenuity. So I would say a lot of the times these conversations all turn into like a binary discussion. It's either this way or this way. The answer is it's somewhere in between all, and it's going to vary and shift in different aspects and all of those things. So I think what's so different about AI than some of the technological things in the past is that people left those to be like, oh, that has to be like the IT people or the tech people and what it is. There's a role to play for everyone with AI. And so it's not that you necessarily have to be a hands-on coder. You don't have to do those, but you need to ask questions. You need to have like the purposes of why and how and what. And I don't necessarily mean the technical coding, but okay, what is the decision basis of it? How is it showing me the parameters of what it's doing? And I think that's incumbent upon all of us to ask those questions, to push back a little further to understand it, but also weigh the value. Does it help me more than not using it? So do I understand the risks? Do I understand the parameters that, hey, this probably shouldn't be used to pick out specific people, but could it help me identify some other things? Those are the types of questions that we as humans should literally be asking and not just accepting that it's either yes or no, good or bad or relevant. I think it's varying degrees of.
So Eve, or is there somebody going to run the question, Diane?
I've got two questions. First of all, how do we stop Terminator from becoming what the world becomes? When computers can recognize how bad humans are to this world and stop them from destroying humans. The second question is, who is responsible for if a computer makes a mistake and we listen to it? Who is legally responsible for what the computer did?
To a particular person, maybe Mark, that's sort of Mark's area. Go ahead.
So am I billing now to answer your question? I'm just joking. It's a liability issue. There's no clear answer yet, is the short answer. I will say the not surprising instinct of many of the companies is to try to push the liability away from them. And we're seeing this right now, in fact, with generative AI, with OpenAI, Google, and Microsoft saying, we just create these huge world-changing foundational models, but we're not really responsible for how they might be used. They want the responsibility to be at the endpoints. It's early days, but I think there's enough liability to go around for everybody.
If AI really gets smart, it will keep us around so we can continue to do annotations at a lower wage for AI. So, you know, it won't kill us. That's, you know, it will employ us. And maybe, you know, less than minimum wage and all that stuff. It will do all of that because it needs data. Somebody has to annotate and we will do that. We'll still be able to live. So I don't think it will kill us.
Hello, my name is Zeke Botokuma. I am a board member of this great organization, Great Talk. I was very happy to hear the statement that thinking is uniquely human, not the activity of machines. However, one of the plans today, I think in London, is by somebody whose name I don't remember. He is working on a plan to move from artificial intelligence to artificial general intelligence, which no mention was made of. And according to those who are behind this plan, whenever we get to AGI, machines will be able to think and learn. I wonder what is your reaction to that?
Great question. Peter or Rama, I'd love to hear your assessment of AGI.
So AGI is a very, very long way off. We're not today anywhere close to it. For the members of the audience that have never heard of it, artificial general intelligence actually addresses David's question from earlier. It's when we perceive that humans are, or that machines are thinking like humans. And so imagine a machine that can play chess, do protein folding, and write your term paper all in the same machine. It sounds like a person, but it's not. I personally am completely unconcerned about that. I think it's an interesting philosophical conversation. I think it has some important technical ramifications, but from a social and social policy perspective, it's not something that I would encourage you to be concerned about. The thing that I would encourage you to be concerned about with regards to GPT is that they don't list their sources. Right? You don't know where ChatGPT is getting its data from. And this is the problem, because you can think that somehow it's generally intelligent because you can ask it questions about chess, and you can ask it questions about clinical support systems or disability evaluations or other things that we care about in our society. And it looks like it knows. It doesn't know. And we don't know where it's getting its data from. This to me is the serious problem.
Steve Pinker is a very well-recognized professor at MIT, and in one of his recent interviews, he said, if you ask ChatGPT, okay, I was at home between 9 and 6 p.m., so where was I at 12 noon? It says, yeah, I don't know, you didn't give me any information, but I clearly said I was at home between 9 and 6, so it can't even reason. So that's why general intelligence, my response is, that is something to look forward to, but will never happen. But the process of getting there, you will discover a lot of things which will help us. So I don't care for a fully automated Tesla, but for it to be automated, it should know where the other cars are. So they put the blind spot detector, which I can use. And it tells me where the car in front of me, so I don't hear it. I like that. So it can, but the idea that it has to be fully automated, work everywhere in the world, no, we don't need that. So general intelligence is something like, a big utopia. But to think about, scientists, we don't think what we are going to do tomorrow, 5 years from now. We think about 50 years, how things are going to be. Because when we think for 50 years, we'll have something that will be very good for 15 years. So because that's how you have to, so people talk about these things, but that's okay.
To interject one comment, I spent a lot of my time covering the US military and the intelligence community. And there is a kind of arms race going on in the world. Part of it is US versus China. But the race to develop AI applications that will be genuinely dangerous is underway. And I think I'm more concerned about that than you are. I mean, it's already, killer robots sound like ridiculous, fantastical. You can get my DNA, and you can, I believe, get an autonomous system if you got it so it could creep and fly and say, kill David, give it my DNA, and it will kill David. It may take a while, But that's not a science fiction fantasy. That technology basically is here. So I just want to note that because my experience as a journalist, spending a lot of time covering this, makes me a little more worried about the race to develop these applications. A lot of it's happening in truth in Ukraine. I mean, the algorithmic war, I wrote about this in December, it's going on in Ukraine is extraordinary.
Unit has a software person who can work with them and so on. That's a new thing.
That was in my article in December.
Yeah, right. I saw that. Yeah, I think there is happening. For example, the robots, drones, going and so on. But that is a very accurate computer vision method. So sometimes I tell people, let's not call everything AI, because computer vision has been doing this for a long time. And then they just made it more and more accurate because UAVs can fly, and then you can give a picture of the image. It's like terminal missile guidance kind of a thing that been going on. It's getting better because the processors are there, GPUs and so forth. So it's getting a little bit more accurate. So this is my concern. We think everything is AI. So I think there is AI and there is, kind of not AI kind of a thing, but kind of looks like it's AI because it's processing data, it's making decisions. There's nothing wrong in that. Things will get better, right? Algorithms get better and so on. But to me, that doesn't mean it's an intelligent thing that, it may know your DNA, but other than that, it doesn't know anything about you, right? It could all be a robot where something, is there a cell with the DNA or whatever, right? So it's still not an intelligent machine. It's a better performing weapon system.
Can I add to that really quick? Because I'm just going to say there's a lot easier ways to target and kill you than to actually train a drone to do that with a DNA-based weapon. So sometimes, again, the simplest answer is there's a lot easier ways. So if that's going to happen, there's just the things. It's like I get all the time, people say, oh, you have, an electronic door lock, right? Somebody can hack that. Okay, do I want the person who's going to hack the intelligence to hack my door? Or I got windows all around it. The person who's just going to go, like that. So again, these are risk and reward balances and thought process because there is other ways.
We have two final questions, one here.
Thank you. So it seems the line for where does AI go too far seems to be in matters of life and death, freedom and equality. So I was just kind of curious as to anyone's opinion on if Neuralink is going too far when it comes to it's kind of secret what's going on, but combining human and computer AI, is that going too far in anyone's opinion?
I don't have a precise answer to the example you gave, which I can imagine actually has some beneficial applications in medicine. But I can tell you that the approach that the Europeans are taking in the AI Act is essentially a risk-based categorization. And as you move up from low risk, like which banner ads you see on a website, to high risk, like determinations about hiring, there are proportionally more burdens placed on the organization deploying the AI system. And then you get into this very interesting category, which I think is what your question goes to, and that's the category of prohibited AI systems. And there are a lot of strong opinions about which AI systems should be prohibited. The UNESCO recommendation on AI ethics says, for example, social scoring, which is a technique that the Chinese government uses basically to determine the level of patriotism toward the CCP, that should simply be prohibited. And that seems now actually to be widely accepted. Mass surveillance, also in the UNESCO recommendation, prohibited. Biometric categorization, do we make decisions about people based on their immutable physical characteristics? Or should that be prohibited? So, as I said, I don't have a good answer to the Neuralink question, and I imagine actually there are some benefits, but there are some very interesting debates taking place right now about which AI applications should simply be prohibited.
I'll give you a personal example. When I was teaching at USC, anytime I go to India, I come out, I was like 29, 30 years old. I had a big mustache and not a close cut hair, kind of really hippie style. So a custom officer will always stop me when I'm waiting for luggage. So where are your papers and so on. Once they asked me if I brought hashish, I said, what is that? Drugs? I said, no. Next time they asked me another time, where do you teach? I said, USC. What do you teach? Electrical engineering. The officer asked, do you know Ohm's law? So I thought about it. I'm a PhD in EE from Purdue. Ohm's law is taught in not elementary school, junior high, high school. Now, when I think back, maybe AI, if it knows I got my PhD from Purdue, it will come up with better questions. It won't ask me Ohm's law. So I like AI, for example. But what I'm saying is it's very, very complicated right now in terms of how this is all going to work out. But one thing that worries me, I was born in a democratic country. I'm living here. I'm probably going to, finish my life here, democratic country. We may be a little bit of at a disadvantage because we do worry about privacy. We have some constraints. So if we may not be able to mine data as we please, Mark gave an example, maybe our systems will be less performant, possible, compared to, other countries where they can willy-nilly, collect data and process and so on. So I would like to move AI from purely dependent on data, domain plus data. In medicine, it's accepted. I would like to go back to the old AI where domain knowledge was more, so I have to depend less on data. If data is the only thing that is going to decide, we may be at a disadvantage because, as I said, I can't just take your pictures and improve my face recognition system.
If I can very quickly add two things. First of all, it ends up that Ohm's law is on the blackboard right here. So that is truly remarkable. The premise of the question, very, very briefly, the premise of the question for me is inaccurate, right? Because we're talking about mass surveillance. And I think that for many of us who grew up in the United States, the Chinese approach to mass surveillance is to us unacceptable. We would not want that in our society. That is not the same thing as AI. That's like saying electric cars lead to automatically vehicular homicide. Now, you can use other kinds of cars to do criminal damage to other human beings or to property, but it doesn't really matter whether it's electric or gas driven. So I think we need to get a little bit of separation between what the specific application is and what the underlying technology is.
Oh, yeah. Well, so amazing. I think all of our minds are in sync here because I wanted to continue on the question of BCIs or neurotechnology and a little bit as a pushback to the previous comment of we don't really need to think about at a social level about a technology that we're very far from, like obviously AGI, which I absolutely agree with because that's truly a scientific problem of understanding our own mind-brain black box. But going to the BCI question, the fact that Chile already has put into their constitution neuro rights. So this whole idea that while, yes, we can use this technology for rehabilitation, absolutely. In fact, APL is doing amazing work in that regard. But in the context of commercializing that technology related to the Neuralink question, I would say, what do you guys think in regards to a harmonization precisely of a technology that while we are far from getting to in terms of getting at the level of mind reading with BCI technology, but the fact that we already have, there is a country in the world who has already instituted that into their constitution. What does that mean for global harmonization in these questions of technologies that are coming there kind of, and yet allowing for innovation moving forward?
Great last question. Thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up.
There's no answer to this perfectly, right? So what's happening is we're in the gray space. We're in the space between where standards or different things that will come out that may be globally accepted. We have early adopters, as you mentioned, we have those. There's a lot of things. There's stuff coming out of NIST where they put out their responsible type of AI type framework. They're trying to start introducing it in the parts of the conversations because the problems are really hard. And so it's not that there's one set of answers. And there are different global efforts right now, especially around ethical AI and different things too, that are actually starting to try to come up. But it is to the point, there's a lot of cultural differences. So cultural differences of what's socially accepted in one country versus others. We tend to always talk about like the extremes. So let's say the United States and China, like the very different social, cultural aspects of it. But there's a lot of gray area. So there's a lot of great work being done. But I know I belong to industry. It's also incumbent upon individual organizations to kind of draw some lines and decide what they're willing to do and not do, and have their own individual kind of risk frameworks and understandings of those, and start bringing it up, and not necessarily just waiting to have some type of governance put in. Should it be there? Controls and measures, 100%. I say that coming as an industry member, but you also don't want to have it too restrictive that it literally kills all innovation.
The last word from our panel. Before I turn it over to you, this was a treat. I think for everybody in the audience, certainly for me, just an incredible opportunity to have four brilliant minds who thought deeply about the question we're all thinking about the most.
Thank you so much. Wow. Really, really wonderful talk. Thank you all for coming. This is a lot to think about. And personally, I feel a little bit relieved after hearing some of this. I had a real trepidation coming, and you gave me a lot of food for thought. But I want to thank you all for joining us, and for our virtual friends who joined us tonight. Great Talk. You could always find us, greattalk.org. We're a nonprofit group. If you liked us, feel free to help us out. And this program will be, we're going to have it recorded on YouTube, and our future programs that we'll have also. So you can find us at Great Talk. But thank you again for a really educational, wonderful evening. Have a good night. I wanted to thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.